This podcast uses AI-generated content. All information is for general purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, legal, or regulatory advice. Listeners should verify information independently and consult qualified professionals for personalized guidance. Welcome to the Luxembourg Fundcast. So, if you're involved in corporate deals, you know the pressure is immense. And getting those key documents right, well, that's everything. I mean, picture this.
Yeah.
You're carefully negotiating a shareholder agreement, right? Planning a long partnership, and then, oops, you accidentally sign a share purchase agreement.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Congratulations. You've either just sold your company without meaning to, or maybe you've invented the world's fastest and probably most unwelcome corporate exit.
It's a critical distinction, absolutely. Getting it wrong is, well,
significant.
it really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into these two agreements. They get confused, but they are fundamentally different beasts. The shareholders agreement, the SHA, and the share purchase agreement, the SPA. Absolutely crucial difference.
Yeah.
You know, it's like confusing, say, a marriage certificate with the divorce papers.
Exactly.
Both are legally binding, sure, but their purpose, their timing, worlds apart.
Couldn't have said it better. So our mission today is to give you a really definitive guide. We're going to break down what they're for, look at the key clauses, the nitty-gritty, explore how negotiations actually play out, and importantly, touch on the latest 2025 legal updates here in Luxembourg that, impact these things.
And by the end, you should have 3 key takeaways nailed down.
Let's hear them.
Okay, first one. Function dictates form. Simply put, a shareholders agreement, the pacte d'actionnaires, it's relational. It's your ongoing rule book. A share purchase agreement, the contrat de cession d'action, it's purely transactional. It's for one specific event, selling shares.
Holy
Easy job.
jobs.
Okay, function dictates form. Got it. What's number 2?
Number 2. Enforceability is paramount. That SHA, it's a private contract. So legally, it only binds the people who actually signed it.
If you want critical stuff, like, say, rules about who can buy shares against the company itself or, against outsiders, you have to mirror those rules strategically in the company's public articles of association, the AOA. That link between the private SHA and the public AOA. That's core to how smart structuring works in Luxembourg.
Right. Bridging that gap between private agreement and public enforceability.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And the third,
the landscape is dynamic, not static. Luxembourg's corporate law isn't standing still. It's always modernizing. We've got key updates for 2025, things like new tax rules on share buybacks, the EU Mobility Directive coming in. These directly affect how you draft these agreements, how you structure deals. So staying up to date, getting expert advice, it's not optional, really.
Absolutely essential. Great overview. Okay, let's start with the shareholders agreement then. You called it the corporate prenup earlier, which I liked. Why is it so vital, especially in Luxembourg's context? Well, the SHA, the pacte d'actionnaires, it's this private contract that sits alongside the company's public articles of association. Think of it like a confidential, detailed user manual just for the shareholders. It gives you flexibility and, crucially, privacy that the public AOA just can't offer.
And who typically uses it?
It's particularly crucial where you have complex ownership. So think joint ventures, private equity deals, places where you have different types of shareholders, maybe founders, financial investors, strategic partners, all needing a clear, agreed-upon framework for how they'll live together. It lets them set bespoke rules on governance, funding, how they'll eventually exit. And it's all based on contractual freedom, liberté, contractuelle in the civil code, letting parties design their own rules, as long as they're legal, of course.
So you've got this public face, the AOA, and this private agreement, the SHA. It sounds like you're getting the best of both worlds.
That's exactly the idea. The AOA are filed publicly, they bind everyone, shareholders and the company, and changing them needs formal steps. The SHA, it's confidential, it only binds the signatories, and you can usually amend it just by agreement. This duality, this mix of public stability and private agility and discretion, it's a huge draw for international setups coming to Luxembourg. The real art, though, is deciding what needs to be in the public AOA versus what can stay flexible and private in the SHA. That takes careful thought.
I can see that. Okay, let's peek inside then. What are some of the absolute must-have clauses, the real deal breakers you find in an SHA?
Well, they vary, naturally, but you generally see clauses focusing on 3 main areas: control, share transfers, and the economics. Let's start with governance and control. These are the who decides what rules.
Right, the power dynamics.
Precisely. An SHA can, for instance, specify that certain shareholders get to nominate board members, bypassing the usual majority rules. This ensures key players, even minority investors, have a seat at the table. Even more critical sometimes are reserved matters and veto rights.
Ah, the breaks.
Exactly. You'll list fundamental decisions, maybe issuing new shares, changing the business plan, taking on significant debt, selling major assets, and say these need a higher level of approval, like a supermajority, or maybe even the consent of a specific minority shareholder. It's a really powerful protection.
Yeah, stops the majority just doing whatever they want. So what about controlling who actually owns the shares? Who gets to be in the club?
Good question. That takes us to the share transfer restriction clauses. These are all about managing ownership. Things like preemption rights are very common. If I want to sell my shares, I have to offer them to you, the existing shareholders, first. Similar is the right of first refusal, where you get to match any offer I receive from an outsider.
Keeps it in the family, so to speak.
It helps, yes. Then you have tag-along rights. This is key for minority protection. If a majority shareholder sells their stake, the buyer must offer to buy the minority shares on the exact same terms, so minorities don't get stuck with a new unknown partner.
And the flip side?
The flip side is the drag-along right. This is the majority's tool. If they find a buyer willing to purchase the whole company, they can force the minority shareholders to sell their shares too on the same terms. Crucial for getting the best price in a full exit.
And I remember you mentioned something specific for Luxembourg SARLS, a mandatory clause.
Yes, that's the approval clause, the clause agrément. It's required by law for a private limited liability company, an SARL. Basically, you can't transfer shares to someone who isn't already a shareholder unless you get approval from shareholders holding at least 75% of the capital. The AOA can lower that threshold, but only down to 50%. It's baked into the SARL structure here.
Okay, makes sense. So control, share transfers. What about the money side, the economics and the exit?
Right, the economic and exit clauses. How do people get paid, and how do they eventually get out? Liquidation preference is huge in venture capital and private equity. It sets the payout order if the company is sold or wound up. Typically, investors get their initial investment back first, often plus a preferred return, before other shareholders, like founders, see anything.
Protects the downside for investors.
Exactly. And then you have clauses outlining actual exit strategies. The SHA can map out potential paths, maybe an IPO or a trade sale. It can also include mechanics like put options, giving a shareholder the right to sell their shares back to the company or other shareholders under certain conditions, and call options, giving someone the right to buy shares from another shareholder. These are really useful tools for planning exits or even resolving disputes.
So we've built this potentially very detailed SHA, but how strong is it really? What happens if someone just ignores it? What about enforceability?
That is the million-euro question, isn't it? If someone breaches the SHA, say, they sell shares ignoring a preemption, right? It's a breach of contract under the civil code, the usual remedy.
Yeah.
Money damages. Luxembourg courts are generally reluctant to order specific performance, meaning they won't usually force the share transfer to be undone, especially if the shares went to an innocent third party.
So there's a gap.
There's definitely what we call the enforceability gap, because the SHA only binds the signatories. Its effect is relative. If I breach the SHA and sell my shares to some unsuspecting outsider, that sale might be perfectly legal and valid. You, the other shareholder, are left with a claim for damages against me, maybe, but you're now stuck with a new co-owner you never wanted.
That sounds problematic. How do you make those crucial restrictions truly stick? How do you bridge that gap?
You build the AOA bridge. This is absolutely key. For the really critical SHA clauses, especially those share transfer restrictions like lockups, preemption approval rules, you must strategically embed them directly into the company's articles of association.
Make them public and binding on the company itself.
Exactly. Once a restriction is in the AOA, it's not just a private promise anymore. It's part of the company's official legal makeup. A share transfer that violates an AOA provision that's unenforceable against the company. It might even be void. This AOA bridge turns your contractual shield into an ironclad gate. It highlights that delicate dance between keeping things confidential in the SHA and ensuring rock-solid enforceability through the AOA. Getting that balance right is where good legal advice is just indispensable.
Fantastic explanation. Okay, let's switch gears now. Part 2. The share purchase agreement? The SPA, the art of the exit. What's its main job?
So if the SHA is the long-term relationship rulebook, the SPA is all about the final act. It's a definitive transactional contract. Its sole purpose is to document and execute the sale of shares from seller to buyer. That's it. All focus is on the mechanics, the price, the risks tied to that specific change of control, not future governance.
And why is it so common in Luxembourg M&A?
It's really the workhorse for private M&A here, mostly for practical and tax reasons. Share deals are just cleaner, procedurally. The buyer acquires the whole entity, assets, liabilities, contracts, and the lot. And share transfers themselves are usually exempt from things like VAT and registration taxes, which can be hefty in, say, an asset deal, especially if Luxembourg real estate is involved.
But there's a catch for the buyer, right? Inheriting everything.
That's the main downside, yes. The buyer inherits the entire company history, warts and all known liabilities, unknown liabilities. And Luxembourg law itself doesn't offer huge protections for the buyer in that situation. So the buyer's shield against all those inherited risks, it's forged almost entirely in the specific clauses of the SPA. That's why SPA negotiation is fundamentally about allocating risk.
Okay, so the SPA clauses are the battleground for risk. What are the absolutely critical components there?
Well, you always have the core transactional bits, who's buying, who's selling, what exactly is being sold. But the real negotiation happens around risk allocation. Central to this are the representations and warranties, the R&Ws.
The seller's promises about the company.
Exactly. An extensive list of factual statements. Financials are correct, taxes are paid, owns the assets, no hidden lawsuits, etc. The buyer relies heavily on these. If a warranty turns out to be untrue, the buyer can sue for damages. But crucially, alongside the SPA, the seller provides a disclosure letter.
Ah, the exceptions list.
You got it.
Yeah.
The seller discloses specific facts or situations that would otherwise make a warranty untrue. If something is fairly disclosed, meaning clearly and with enough detail, the buyer is considered to know about it and can't claim a breach for that specific issue. It forces the seller to be transparent, but it also shifts that disclosed risk to the buyer.
Okay, so R&Ws cover general risks. Disclosure carves out known issues. What if due diligence flags a very specific potential problem?
That's where indemnities come in. These are specific negotiated promises from the seller to cover the buyer, euro for particular known or potential liabilities. Maybe the cost of an ongoing lawsuit or specific tax uncertainty identified during due diligence. Unlike a warranty claim, where you have to prove loss, with an indemnity, the buyer generally just needs to show the agreed cost was incurred.
And the seller obviously wants to limit their exposure.
Naturally. Sellers will push hard for limitations on their liability. This means financial caps on warranty claims, often a percentage of the purchase price time limits for bringing claims, maybe 1 or 2 years for general business issues, longer like 6 or 7 years, for tax, and thresholds like de minimis amounts or baskets to stop buyers making claims for trivial amounts.
That careful crafting of risk sounds absolutely vital for the buyer. How does Luxembourg law frame all this?
Well, the share transfer itself falls under the law of 1915 on commercial companies like that SARL approval we talked about. That becomes a key condition in the SPA. Right. The SPA contract itself is governed by the civil code, including the duty to negotiate in good faith. But ultimately, because the buyer's taking on the whole company history, those negotiated risk clauses in the SPA, the R&Ws, the disclosure process, the indemnities, the limitations, that is the buyer's primary essential protection.
Right. Okay, we understand the documents now. Let's talk about actually getting them done. The art of the deal, negotiation, costs, and timelines. How does negotiating an SHA feel different from negotiating an SPA?
Oh, completely different dynamics. Night and day, almost. Negotiating an SHA is usually more like a group effort in constitution building, multiple parties figuring out how they'll live together long term.
More collaborative.
Generally, yes. The focus is on creating a stable, balanced framework for the future, finding common ground for growth and resolving potential conflicts down the line. An SPA negotiation, that's typically bilateral, just buyer and seller, and often much more adversarial.
Because the relationship is ending, not starting.
Exactly. It's terminal. It often feels more like a zero-sum game focused purely on price and risk. Buyer wants the lowest price, maximum protection via broad warranties, minimal limitations. Seller wants the highest price, narrow warranties, tight limitations, a clean break.
And that information gap must be huge. The seller knows everything, the buyer knows very little initially.
That's the core tension. The seller has all the history, knows where the skeletons are buried, metaphorically speaking. The buyer starts from scratch, relying on due diligence. The SPA's risk clauses are designed precisely to bridge that gap. R&Ws force the seller to make statements. The disclosure letter forces them to reveal the known exceptions. And good due diligence. That empowers the buyer to demand specific indemnities for identified risks or negotiate the price down. Those specific protections are much stronger than relying on general warranty claims after the deal is done.
Makes sense. Okay, let's get practical. Costs and timelines. What should people brace themselves for when getting these complex agreements drafted in Luxembourg?
Well, first off, there isn't a regulated fee scale for lawyers here. Fees really depend on the deal's complexity, its value, who's doing the work, lawyer seniority, firm reputation, and how much time it takes. Hourly rates are common, but you might get fixed or capped fees for specific parts. Plus, usually at a percentage, maybe 5 to 10%, for general office costs and then 17% VAT on top.
So complex deals mean significant costs.
Yes, especially high-value M&A or very tailored SHAs. Don't expect costs to be like simpler deals or what you might see in other places. It's bespoke work. Timelines. Also highly variable. A straightforward domestic deal might be weeks. A complex cross-border acquisition involving multiple companies, that could easily stretch over a year.
Wow. And you mentioned recent regulatory changes impacting timelines, especially that period between signing and closing.
Yes, that interim period is increasingly a factor. You've always had conditions like getting third-party consents or regulatory nods, but now Luxembourg's got its own domestic merger control law coming likely finalized in 2025. If your deal hits certain turnover thresholds here, you'll need pre-closing clearance from the competition authority.
Adding potentially weeks or months.
Yeah, exactly. A Phase 1 review is 25 working days, but if it goes to Phase 2, that's potentially another 90 working days. Plus, we've had the Foreign Direct Investment, or FDI, screening law since September 2023. Certain non-EU investments into critical sectors need prior approval from the Ministry of the Economy. So you have these extra regulatory hoops that can significantly extend the time between signing the deal and actually closing it. Planning for that is crucial.
A lot to juggle. Okay, final stretch, the horizon. 2025 updates and the Luxembourg advantage. What are the key legal changes effective in 2025 that people really need on their radar?
Luxembourg's always refining its framework. For 2025, some important tax reforms kicked in. The budget law now clarifies the rules for share buybacks, making it clearer when they can be treated as a partial liquidation for tax purposes, usually better than dividend treatment. That provides welcome certainty. Also, there's a new option for companies to waive participation exemption benefits on dividends and capital gains, which gives corporate groups more flexibility in managing their overall tax position, maybe using tax losses more effectively.
Interesting. And that EU mobility directive you mentioned earlier, how does that impact things?
Right, the EU Mobility Directive transposition. Luxembourg brought this into law in early 2025. It harmonizes rules across the EU for cross-border mergers, divisions, and conversions, the big practical impact. It significantly strengthens employee rights, information, consultation, even participation in some cases during these kinds of restructurings. So employee consultations now need to be factored much more carefully into M&A deal planning and timelines.
So it feels like while corporate law stays flexible, the regulatory oversight is definitely increasing.
That's a good way to put it. We sometimes call it a regulatory pincer movement. On one side, Luxembourg's core corporate law remains very flexible, very pro-contractual freedom, which attracts sophisticated deals. But on the other side, the regulatory scrutiny around transactions is tightening up merger control, FDI screening, enhanced employment law aspects, navigating deals successfully here in 2025 and beyond. It demands a really holistic approach. You need coordinated advice covering corporate, tax, regulatory, competition, employment law right from the very start.
Given all that complexity, what would you say is Luxembourg's unique selling point now? Why do deals still happen here?
I think it boils down to a unique combination. First, you have that foundation, a stable, predictable, continental European civil law system, but one that deeply respects contractual freedom. This lets parties use sophisticated, often Anglo-Saxon-style agreements like SHAs and SPAs, customizing them extensively, but with the confidence they'll be enforced within a reliable European framework.
The best of both worlds again.
Kind of, yes. Second is that strategic flexibility and confidentiality. We talked about the public AOA providing the stable structure, the private SHA allowing tailored, discrete arrangements. That's incredibly valuable for complex international groups. And third, and maybe most importantly, is Luxembourg's commitment to proactive modernization. It doesn't just sit still. The constant updates, like the 2025 reforms, show it's actively adapting its laws to meet the needs of modern international business and finance. This builds confidence and provides long-term legal certainty, which is exactly what sophisticated investors are looking for. So just to quickly recap those three key takeaways for everyone. First, function dictates form. Remember, SHA for the relationship, SPA for the transaction. They do different jobs. Second, enforceability is paramount. Your private SHA promises need that public AOA bridge to be truly watertight against the world. And third, the landscape is dynamic. Things are changing: tax, corporate rules, regulations. What worked last year might need tweaking this year. Staying current and getting that expert guidance is absolutely vital to leverage the Luxembourg advantage effectively.
That was a fantastic deep dive, really insightful, and you made some very complex topics crystal clear. Thank you so much for guiding us through the crucial differences between SHAs and SPAs. This podcast uses AI-generated content. All information is for general purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, legal, or regulatory advice. Listeners should verify information independently and consult qualified professionals for personalized guidance. Hit that like and subscribe button. It was the Luxembourg Fundcast for you today.